Hi, in this video, I'll cover how to upload data and view it with descriptive and distribution plots in MrBean. To start, we'll launch the app from RStudio with library MrBean and MrBean: run app. On the left side of the homepage for MrBean, there's a panel to select the page displayed. To start, click on the Upload tab under the Data dropdown. On this page, we can select the source of our data for analysis in MrBean. MrBean has a built-in example dataset, but you can also upload your own data by switching source to import data. You can then upload a CSV, text, or Excel file containing your data with the Browse button in the Import Data tab. If your data does not appear correctly in the data region at the bottom, you can change cell separation character to a more suitable one for your data. You can also set the missing value character in your data, whether it's NA, just empty, or some other character, which you can then set in the string box that appears when other is selected. You can also subset your data so that only certain parts of the data are included. The data I uploaded contains 3 experiments, but I can subset it to use only one of the experiments by setting subset variable to expt and setting which level to the experiment I want to use. The data that will be used in the MrBean analysis appears below in the data box. MrBean also has capability to import data from Brappy, the web service API for plant breeding data. Selecting this option for source prompts the user for the server to connect to, as well as login credentials to connect to the server. To use the example data, click Example Data in the source box. We can sort, search, and filter our dataset in the data box. For this demonstration, I'll use the example data included in the app. Before going further in analyzing the data, it's always good to do a statistical descriptive analysis to gain insights from the data or to catch any inconsistencies. Now, we'll create descriptive plots of the data we have selected. Click the Descriptives tab under Data to change the tab. Then, we have 2 boxes where we can make 2 kinds of descriptive plots, scatterplot and box plot. To define the parameters for the plots, click the orange gear icon. We'll start with the scatterplot. We have options for 2 parameters in the scatterplot, a variable for the y-axis and a variable for the x-axis. The variables come from the headers of the data we uploaded. We have an option to use a grouping variable, which will color the scatterplot based on an additional variable. To start, we'll just plot the layout of the field, colored according to blocks. So, set the y-axis variable to columns and the x-axis variable to rows, and we'll use block as a grouping variable. Once we have the inputs set up, click Plot, and our plot is displayed. Then, we can filter the plot by our grouping variable by double-clicking on one of the blocks in the legend on the left. You can undo this by double-clicking on the same block again. Single-clicking on one of the blocks hides it, and clicking again reveals it. We'll make one more scatterplot to see some correlation between data. Set the variable for the y-axis to ydha clean, and the variable for the x-axis to ydhpl. We'll use a grouping variable of reps. So, when we click Plot, we see a strong positive correlation, and that the points in the plot are colored according to which of the 2 reps they're in. We also get automatically generated correlation coefficients and p-values. In the other box on this page, we can make box plots. Again, click the orange gear icon to set up the variables for the plot. We have the same options as in the scatterplot, a variable for the y-axis, a variable for the x-axis, and an additional grouping variable. I'll set the y-axis variable to ydha and the x-axis variable to column, with no grouping variable for now. Then, when we click Plot, we get our box plot. You can hover over the boxes in the plot to get numerical values for the 5-number summary that the box depicts. Now, open the input list box and set a grouping variable of rep. Then, when we click Plot, we get 2 separate box plots, grouped by rep. In addition to descriptive plots, we can also make distribution plots of our data, which we can access in the Distribution tab under Data. Then, we can select the variable we want to make a distribution plot of, and set transparency and bin width of the plot with the sliders. We also have the option to use an additional variable as a grouping variable, with the grouping variable checkbox. I'll set this to rep for this example. Then, we get 2 plots overlaid on top of each other, and we can set the transparency of the density plots with the alpha density slider. We can also separate the plots by grouping variable instead of having them stacked with the individual plots checkbox. So, when we uncheck this with our grouping variable rep, we get 2 individual plots instead of 1 plot. We have a tab on the distribution plots page called Summary Statistics, which gives a variety of basic stats about the input data. If we have a grouping variable set, the summary statistics are split up by that variable.